Part 1. The Iron Storm. The dawn of June 22, 1941, came quietly over the fields of eastern Poland. The air was calm, the mist still resting on the low valleys, and somewhere beyond the thin veil of peace, more than 3 million men waited for the signal to unleash hell. For months, they had trained in silence. German soldiers, the best-equipped army in Europe, lined up along a front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Tanks rumbled in formation. Artillery pieces gleamed under the pale morning sun. Luftwaffe pilots sat in cockpits, engines humming softly, waiting for a single order that would ignite the largest invasion in human history. Inside his field headquarters near Rassenburg, Adolf Hitler stood over a giant map. His hands trembled slightly, though not from fear, from obsession. He leaned toward General Franz Halder, the chief of staff of the German army. Hitler, when this begins, there will be no turning back. Europe will hold its breath. Halder, the men are ready, my Führer. The Russians won't expect a blow of this magnitude. Hitler, they will fall like wheat before the scythe. Blitzkrieg, one last time. At 3:15 a.m., German artillery opened fire. A thunderous roar echoed across the border. The Iron Storm had begun. The Red Dawn across the border. Soviet troops in frontier garrisons were just beginning to stir when the first shells fell. In Brest-Litovsk, the ground erupted under the first barrage. Private Ivan Mikhailov, only 19, woke to the sound of shattering glass and the deep, rhythmic howl of Stuka dive bombers. He stumbled out of his barracks, boots half-tied, eyes wide with disbelief. Mikhailov, Comrade Sergeant. What's happening? Sergeant, war, Ivan. It's war. Get your rifle. Mikhailov, but, we were told it was only maneuvers, Sergeant. Then these are the loudest maneuvers I've ever heard. Within minutes, entire Soviet airfields were ablaze. Hundreds of planes, caught on the ground, turned to twisted metal under Luftwaffe bombs. The sky glowed orange. Smoke climbed into the heavens like black banners of fate. The Blitzkrieg unleashed. 3 colossal army groups surged eastward. Army Group North toward Leningrad, Army Group Center toward Moscow, Army Group South toward Kiev. Panzer divisions cut through Soviet lines like knives through paper. The roads filled with refugees and burning columns of trucks. German soldiers advanced singing, convinced they were marching toward an easy victory. General Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, stood in his command vehicle, binoculars raised. He smiled as his tanks rolled forward, their treads chewing up miles of dirt and glory. Guderian, look at them run. The Russians can't even form a defense. Colonel Hoth, it's too easy, sir. They scatter before we reach them. Guderian, don't mistake confusion for weakness. Hoth. The bear bleeds slowly, but it does bleed. Within 2 days, Minsk fell. The Wehrmacht had advanced nearly 200 miles. Thousands of Soviet soldiers were captured in vast pockets, entire armies encircled and destroyed. German propaganda called it a victory without equal, but behind the front, a different reality was unfolding. The Soviet state, stunned, humiliated, was awakening to fury. In the Kremlin in Moscow, Joseph Stalin sat in silence as the first reports arrived. He refused to believe them at first, convinced that Germany wouldn't break their non-aggression pact. When confirmation came, he turned pale and muttered only, "Stalin, Hitler has betrayed me." 4 hours, he disappeared from public view. Ministers whispered that the leader had fallen into shock, but when he returned, his voice was cold steel. "Stalin, comrades, the German fascists have treacherously invaded our motherland. There can be no mercy. Burn the crops. Destroy the bridges. The enemy must find nothing but ashes." That order, scorched earth, would echo through every village, every retreating regiment. The soldiers whirled. By early July, the fields of Belarus were littered with corpses and wreckage. The air stank of oil and blood. German soldiers marched through ghost towns where churches still burned and the only sounds were the creak of wagons and the buzzing of flies. In one such village, Sergeant Karl Weber of the Wehrmacht sat by a ruined well, writing a letter home. Weber, writing, "We were told it would be quick. But the land seems endless, and the people, they vanish into the forests. Every night, we hear gunfire in the dark. They say it's partisans. I don't know what I believe anymore." Meanwhile, in the ruins of a barn nearby, a group of Soviet partisans were indeed watching, rifles in hand, waiting for their moment. Partisan leader, let them pass. We'll strike the supply columns tonight. They won't sleep easy here. The shadow war had already begun. The turning sky. By late July, the pace of the German advance began to slow. Roads turned to mud. Fuel convoys lagged behind. Soviet resistance stiffened. Every mile east felt heavier than the last. General von Bock looked over his maps and frowned. Von Bock, we are 200 kilometers from Moscow. 200. And yet it feels like 1,000. Chief of Staff, the Russians fight harder with every step, sir. They do not surrender like in the West. Von Bock, then we must remind them why they should fear us. He didn't yet know that beyond the horizon, a storm greater than any he'd ever faced was gathering, a storm of ice and resolve. The Iron Storm was only beginning. What started as lightning, swift and glorious, would soon drown in mud, snow, and blood. Part 2, The Road to Moscow. The summer of 1941 was a season of fire. From the forests of Lithuania to the wheat fields of Ukraine, the earth burned beneath the tracks of panzer divisions. The Wehrmacht seemed unstoppable, a steel serpent stretching across the steppe, swallowing towns, rivers, and whole armies in its coils. And yet, for all their victories, the Germans could feel something changing. The air was different, heavier, colder. The land itself seemed to resist them. The blood fields of Smolensk. By late July, the road to Moscow ran through Smolensk, an ancient city, now a fortress of desperation. Soviet armies, shattered but unbroken, rallied under new commanders. One name began to echo across the front, Georgy Zhukov. Inside a dimly lit bunker west of the city, Zhukov stood over a map, his uniform stained with dust. Around him, exhausted officers argued about retreat or counterattack. Zhukov listened in silence, then slammed his fist on the table. Zhukov, enough talk. Moscow is behind us, there is nowhere to fall back to. We fight here, or we die here. Order the 16th and 20th Armies to strike from the north and south. We'll trap their spearhead and cut their supply lines. Colonel Cherniakovsky, but, Comrade General, they have tanks by the hundreds. Zhukov, then we'll burn every one of them. The motherland demands it. His eyes burned like the fire outside the bunker. The Red Army was beginning to learn, blood for blood, tank for tank, the iron and the mud on the German side. General Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group was advancing rapidly but at a terrible cost. The roads east of Smolensk had turned to rivers of mud. Engines choked, supply trucks sank, and every kilometer forward cost gallons of fuel and lives. In a rare moment of frustration, Guderian confronted Field Marshal von Bock during a strategy meeting near Orsha. Guderian, my men are exhausted. We've driven thousands of kilometers with no rest. We need supplies, not speeches. Von Bock, you will have Moscow, General. You simply need to push harder. Guderian, Moscow won't matter if our tanks are empty by the time we get there. Von Bock said nothing. He knew Guderian was right, but no one dared defy Hitler's orders. The Führer demanded victory before the autumn rains. The scorched earth as the Wehrmacht pushed deeper, the Soviets destroyed everything they could not defend. Bridges collapsed in flames, railways exploded, and entire villages vanished into smoke. Refugees filled the roads, their faces gray with ash and fear. Private Karl Weber, the young soldier who once wrote home about the easy victories, now trudged through the ruins of a burned settlement. He found a single Russian woman standing in front of her smoldering house, staring at him. Weber, why burn your own home? Woman, quietly, better ashes than slaves. She turned and walked away. Weber said nothing. He could no longer find the words to explain the war he was fighting. The sky turns red by September, the Luftwaffe ruled the air, or so they believed, but every day, more Soviet fighters appeared. Crude, underpowered, often outnumbered, yet flown by men who refused to die easily. Captain Erich Müller, a Luftwaffe ace, wrote in his diary after a dogfight near Vyazma, they come at us in waves, with no fear. I shot one down today, he rammed a bomber before falling. Madness. Or courage? Perhaps both. The war that had begun as a triumph of precision now descended into chaos. The Germans took Vyazma and Bryansk in October, Two massive encirclements that captured nearly 600,000 Soviet troops. Berlin rejoiced, but those who were there saw something else. The Russians didn't stop fighting, even inside the pockets. Sergeant Kruger, "Sir, they don't surrender, they crawl out of the forests at night, shooting at our sentries." "Lieutenant, they're beaten." Kruger, "Then why do they keep coming?" No one answered him. The gates of Moscow. By late October, the spires of Moscow appeared faintly on the horizon. The Germans could sense victory. The city of Lenin and Stalin, the heart of the Soviet Union, seemed within reach. But winter was coming early that year. Snow fell for the first time on November 6. Engines froze overnight. Lubricants thickened, weapons jammed. Soldiers wrapped themselves in stolen blankets and civilian coats, anything to fight the cold. Inside a heated train car in Smolensk, Hitler addressed his generals by telephone. "Hitler, drive them from Moscow. This campaign will end before Christmas." Von Bock, hesitant, "Mein Führer, the men are tired, and the weather." Hitler, "Excuses." Napoleon failed because he hesitated. "I will not." The line went dead. Von Bock removed his cap and rubbed his temples. He had read the history of 1812. He knew how that story ended. The red capital in Moscow. The atmosphere was apocalyptic. German artillery could already be heard in the distance. Thousands fled east, factories dismantled piece by piece and shipped to the Urals. Yet Stalin stayed. He walked through the half-empty halls of the Kremlin, chain-smoking and thinking aloud. "Stalin, if we leave Moscow, we lose the war. If we stay, we might lose the city. But the people must see that their leader does not run." He summoned General Zhukov once again. "Stalin, Comrade Zhukov, can you hold Moscow?" "Zhukov, if we are allowed to fight the way we must, yes. But I need every man, every tank, every gun. No interference." Stalin, after a pause, "Then Moscow is yours to defend." It was the first time in the war that Stalin had entrusted full command to someone else. The snow begins. By the end of November, temperatures plunged to -30 degrees C. German soldiers froze in their trenches, unable to sleep. Horses died in the snow, fuel turned to sludge, an entire division stalled. The lightning war had turned into a frozen nightmare. Private Weber huddled beside a small fire, his hands trembling. "Weber, they said we'd be home for Christmas." "Corporal Heinz, maybe we will. Just not which Christmas." Above them, the northern lights shimmered faintly in the icy sky, green, ghostly, and silent, and from the east, like whispers in the wind, came the sound of engines, not German ones. The Red Army was moving. The road to Moscow had ended. The road to survival was about to begin. Part 3, The Siege in the Snow. The first blizzard came on the night of December 1, 1941. What began as a thin curtain of snow turned into a howling storm that erased the world. Roads vanished, landmarks disappeared, and the horizon dissolved into endless white. The Wehrmacht, which had roared across Europe like a machine of destiny, now stood frozen on the doorstep of Moscow. Engines no longer turned. Oil had turned to glue, fingers cracked and bled just from loading a rifle, and in the silence between the wind and the gunfire, men began to feel something they hadn't since the first days of war: fear. The frozen front. Private Karl Weber woke to find his boots frozen solid to the ground. He pried them loose with a bayonet, his breath clouding in the dark. Somewhere nearby, a soldier screamed. Frostbite had taken another man's hands. Weber stumbled to the line, where a few soldiers huddled behind snowbanks, rifles clutched like lifelines. "Weber, where's the lieutenant?" "Corporal Heinz, fever took him. He's gone." "Weber, gone where?" Heinz, grimly, "Does it matter?" Above them, Soviet artillery began to thunder. The blasts rolled through the snow like echoes of distant gods. For the first time in months, the Germans weren't advancing. They were holding, barely. Zhukov's counterattack inside a command post north of Moscow. General Zhukov stood wrapped in a greatcoat, his breath steaming in the cold. Around him, officers crowded over a map lit by a single lamp. The Soviet lines had been bleeding for months, but now reinforcements were arriving, fresh Siberian divisions, veterans of the Far East, hardened by winters far worse than this. "Zhukov, the Germans think winter will save them from us. They forget, it's our ally." Colonel Rokossovsky, "Our men are exhausted, Comrade General. Supplies are thin." Zhukov, so are theirs. But we have something they don't, home. He looked around the room, meeting each officer's gaze. Zhukov, tomorrow, we strike. On December 5th, the Red Army launched a massive counteroffensive along a 200-mile front. The blizzard masked their movement, white shapes advancing through white silence, until the storm erupted in flame. The German collapse when the first Soviet tanks appeared out of the snow. German sentries thought they were hallucinating. They weren't. T-34s and KV-1s, machines built for winter, plowed through the drifts like phantoms. Their guns blazing, panic spread through the German lines. Officers shouted. Radios screamed. Men ran. Weber, they're everywhere. I can't see them. Heinz, hold the line. Hold, a shell exploded nearby. Heinz vanished in a red mist. Weber threw himself into a ditch as bullets tore through the snow above. When he looked up, he saw figures in white camouflage running toward him, bayonets gleaming like shards of ice. The world had turned into a white inferno. The Moscow Miracle in the Kremlin. Stalin listened to reports from the front. For the first time in the war, the news was good. Officer, Comrade Stalin, the Germans are retreating. Zhukov's forces have pushed them back from Klin and Kaluga. The line is broken. Stalin, quietly, good. Let the world see that the Red Army stands. Outside, the people of Moscow celebrated in the snow, waving red flags and shouting, Za Rodinu. For the motherland, for months they had lived in terror, ready to see their city fall. Now, for the first time, they believed it might survive the frozen dead, but victory came at a terrible cost. Tens of thousands of corpses lay buried beneath the snow, men and horses alike. When the snow melted months later, the fields would turn black with decay. German field hospitals overflowed with frostbitten soldiers. Doctors amputated fingers, hands, and feet by candlelight, the air thick with the smell of gangrene. Guderian himself, once confident and fierce, now stood in a frozen command post near Yukhnov, staring at a map that no longer meant anything. Guderian, we were never meant to fight a war like this. Staff officer, the men need orders, sir. Guderian, tell them to survive. The bear awakes. Zhukov's offensive pushed the Germans back more than 150 miles. The myth of the invincible Wehrmacht, the army that had crushed Poland, France, and half of Europe, was broken. Captured German diaries told the same story. The cold is our enemy now. The Russians never stop coming. We thought they would break. It is we who are breaking. As 1942 dawned, the Red Army stood bloody but unbroken. The Wehrmacht had failed to take Moscow, and in doing so, had lost the chance to win the war. A night of fire on Christmas Eve, Weber sat beside a dying fire, clutching a frozen crust of bread. Snow drifted through the broken roof of a barn. He thought of home, of warm lights, music, laughter, but all he could see was white. A faint voice came from the darkness, Russian voice, Nimitz, German. Weber turned, raising his rifle. A wounded Soviet soldier crawled toward him, half dead, eyes hollow. The two men stared at each other in silence. Then Weber lowered his weapon. He took what little bread he had and placed it in the man's hand. The soldier nodded once, slowly, before the snow swallowed his breath. For a moment, the war was quiet, the end of the beginning. By January, the German High Command had ordered a general retreat. Hitler refused to call it that. He called it a strategic adjustment, but everyone at the front knew the truth. The great offensive had failed. The blitzkrieg was over. Now began a war of endurance, one that neither side had truly prepared for. As dawn rose over the frozen plains, Zhukov stood outside his headquarters, snow falling softly on his shoulders. Rokossovsky, we've done it, Comrade General. Moscow stands. Zhukov, yes. But this is only the first winter. There will be many more. He looked east, toward the rising sun. Behind him, the ruins of villages smoked beneath the snow. Ahead, the long war waited. The German army would regroup in 1942, striking again toward Stalingrad and the Caucasus, but they would never again reach so close to Moscow, or to victory. Part 4, The Fall of Titans. The snow melted slowly in the spring of 1942, revealing the dead beneath. Across the endless plains of Russia lay twisted metal, burnt tanks, frozen corpses, the wreckage of an empire's ambition. Operation Barbarossa had promised a swift victory. Instead, it had birthed a war that would devour everything. The men who survived the winter did not cheer when the sun returned. They stared silently at the thawing earth, knowing what it would reveal. The new offensive in May. Hitler summoned his generals to his mountain retreat at Berghof. The great fireplace burned brightly as he paced before them, eyes feverish, voice full of conviction that bordered on madness. Hitler, Moscow eluded us, yes. But we will strike again, south this time. Oil, gentlemen. The Caucasus. The Volga. Without them, Russia will collapse. Keitel, the men are weary, my Führer. Supplies are thin. Hitler, weary. They have no right to be weary. They are the soldiers of destiny. And destiny bends to will. The new plan, Operation Blue, would send the German armies toward the rich oil fields of Baku and the city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. The name itself, Stalingrad, was irresistible to Hitler. He would crush Stalin's namesake city and claim it as proof that Germany still ruled fate. The road south be summer, the German war machine rumbled forward once again. The fields of Ukraine bloomed with sunflowers, and the tanks rolled between them like black serpents. The sky was blue, the air warm. And many soldiers began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time it would be different. Private Karl Weber, now thin and hardened, wrote in his journal as his unit advanced, "They say the war will end when we take Stalingrad. But I have learned not to believe promises. We've been here before, chasing horizons that always move further away." The City of Steel. In August 1942, the Luftwaffe unleashed a firestorm upon Stalingrad. The once proud industrial city burned for days, thousands of civilians killed, entire districts turned to ash. When the smoke cleared, the city looked like the surface of another planet. Rubble, smoke, shattered glass, and death. German officers expected an easy capture. They were wrong. For every block they took, the Soviets counterattacked. Every building became a fortress, every basement a bunker, they called it. The Rattenkrieg, the War of Rats. The voices of the dead inside the ruins of a collapsed factory. Lieutenant Hans Reiner, leading a platoon of the 6th Army, crouched behind a broken wall as bullets cracked overhead. Reiner, where are they? Corporal Dietz, everywhere, sir. They wait until you move. Reiner, then we move together. He looked to his left. The men were barely more than shadows in dust. Reiner, for God's sake, how long can this last? Dietz, until someone runs out of bullets, sir. I just don't know who first. On the other side of the rubble, Sergeant Ivan Petrov of the Red Army loaded his rifle. His face was black with soot. Petrov, they want this city. Then they'll pay for every brick. Comrade, they already have. Petrov, not enough. The two sides fought within meters of each other, rooms, staircases, sewers. Sometimes, soldiers could hear the enemy breathing through the walls. The Stalingrad hell. By October, Stalingrad was a graveyard. The Volga ran red at dusk, carrying bodies downstream. German soldiers starved, Soviet soldiers froze, artillery never stopped. The air itself seemed to scream. At headquarters, General Paulus, commander of the German 6th Army, reported to Berlin. Paulus, the enemy holds the factories and riverbank. We need reinforcements. Hitler, via radio, there will be no retreat. You will take the city or die in it. Paulus, Mein Führer, Hitler, Stalingrad will be taken. That is an order. Paulus lowered the receiver. The room was silent. Outside, shells fell like rain. Zhukov strikes back while the Germans bled in the ruins. Zhukov was planning vengeance. Operation Uranus, a massive double envelopment, would crush the 6th Army by striking its weak flanks held by Romanian and Italian divisions. On November 19, 1942, the snow returned, and with it, the sound of Soviet artillery. Thousands of guns opened fire at once. The ground shook like thunder. Zhukov, now. Close the trap. From north and south, Soviet tanks converged around Stalingrad. Within 4 days, 300,000 German troops were surrounded. The encirclement. The 6th Army's radios crackled with disbelief. Reiner, we're surrounded. That's impossible. Staff officer, the lines to the west are gone. We're cut off. Reiner, then we'll hold until relief arrives. Staff officer, quietly, if it arrives. Food ran out. Ammunition dwindled. The wounded froze where they lay. Hitler promised air supply. It failed. Planes brought a fraction of what was needed. The rest never came. Weber wrote in his journal for the last time, the snow falls on friend and foe alike. We no longer fight for victory, only to be remembered. The end of the Sixth Army. By January 1943, Paulus's forces were starving, their weapons useless in the cold. On January 31st, Soviet troops broke into his headquarters in the ruins of the Univermag building. Soviet officer: "You are General Paulus?" Paulus: "Yes." Officer: "Your men have fought bravely. It's over." Paulus, after a long silence: "Yes. It is over." He surrendered that afternoon. The once proud Sixth Army, 300,000 men, ceased to exist. Of those captured, only about 5,000 would ever return to Germany. The death of an illusion in Berlin. Hitler refused to listen to the reports. He walked the halls of his bunker muttering to himself, "Hitler, Paulus should have shot himself. The army has failed me. They all have." But even his rage could not hide the truth. Stalingrad had shattered the myth of German invincibility. From that moment on, the Reich would only retreat, bleeding step by step back toward the west. The long road home in February, the frozen ruins of Stalingrad fell silent. The red banner flew once more over the city. Zhukov stood amid the smoke and snow, staring at what remained. Rokossovsky: "We've done it, Georgy Konstantinovich. The Volga is ours again." Zhukov: "Yes. But look at the price." He turned toward the horizon. The sun was rising over a wasteland. Thousands of corpses, steel, and ashes. It was victory, but not triumph. It was the beginning of the end, not just for Germany, but for millions more who would die before the guns finally fell silent. Epilogue: The Broken Cross. By the winter of 1943, Operation Barbarossa, once the most ambitious campaign in human history, was dead. In its place lay the ruins of two nations locked in a war that would burn for another 2.5 years. The iron storm had devoured its creators. The snow had become a grave, and from that grave rose the sound of marching, east to west, until Berlin itself would fall. They came as conquerors, Zhukov would later say, and they left as ghosts.